Grayson. Here's our first guest of the night. If you wanted to ask, Dr. Hovind a question, go ahead, and then we'll just go from there.
Okay, sweet. Hey, Kent. I wanted to ask tonight about the Grand Canyon, if that's okay. So you believe, correct, that the Grand Canyon was formed very quickly when some kind of like dam burst, or you believe it was formed very rapidly, correct?
Grand Canyon is the dam. The Kaibab Plateau is the dam. Grand Canyon is the breach in that dam. If you plugged up Grand Canyon today, a great big lakes would back up clear into Colorado and New Mexico, called Grand Lake and Hopi Lake. You can still see the beach line where they used to be. There were, I would guess, billions of gallons of water went rushing through there, probably in a matter of, Grand Canyon probably formed in about a week. It's a breach in a dam. We've seen this happen many times through human history. Man builds a dam, water gets too deep. What happens when any lake gets too deep? The water finds the lowest place and cuts a notch and drains the water out. It happens all. Google dam bursts or dam breaks. Thousands of them happen.
Thanks for clarifying your thoughts on the formation. What I wanted to ask was about the specific types of fossils that we actually do find in the Grand Canyon. Why don't we ever find dinosaur fossils there? Why don't we find mammals or birds or any of the kinds of fossils that we would expect to find if this kind of thing had happened in relatively modern times with modern animal populations? The only fossils that we find are sea life, which would not have happened if this was like an event that happened in the current formation of where the Grand Canyon is currently. We wouldn't find all this sea life. And then for the terrestrial animals,
slow down. Hey, wait a minute. One topic at a time. Don't slap and run.
I won't slap and run, I promise. Yeah. I just wanted to finish my question.
Let me shut up for a minute. Let me answer that one, okay? First of all, have you ever been to Grand Canyon?
Yes.
Okay, me too, many times, okay? I've flown over it, helicopter down into it, studied it, love studying Grand Canyon, taught earth science for years. You're arguing, though, from the lack of evidence, which is a lousy position to be in. We say, well, we haven't found this, therefore, stop right there. The fact that something hasn't been found yet doesn't prove anything, okay? Now, I don't know that your first claim is true, that we haven't found, or nobody has found, mammals or birds as fossils in Grand Canyon. If Grand Canyon is indeed a breached dam, it is the breach in the dam. The dam is the Kaibab Plateau. Grand Canyon cuts right across it. So the fact that fossils aren't found in a certain area doesn't indicate anything. I don't think it's certainly not proof they didn't exist. Fossils of those same animals are found all over the world. So I don't understand your point. So stay on that point, please. You're saying no bird fossils have been found in Grand Canyon. Is that your claim?
Yeah, so there's no bird fossils, no dinosaurs, no mammals. And by fossils here, I'm talking about like that have gone through the mineralization process. So not like recent bones that are still completely bone. I'm talking about mineralized bone.
Right.
And then
mineralized,
the other thing, so I brought up that what we find is majoritively marine life, like from the oceans. But I was going to say the few things that we find that are terrestrial are like insects, like dragonflies, which is strange enough, but we find animal tracks. So actually like tracks and footprints going through what would have been like a soft, sandy kind of surface for them to leave these kinds of tracks. How could that have been formed like in the middle of the layers of the Grand Canyon? If it happened so quickly, how would there have been time for animals to have tracks in between all the layers?
Oh, you're missing the point completely. The canyon formed after Noah's flood, probably 50 or 100 years after the flood. The layers formed because of the flood. So you're confusing two things completely. The stratification happened during Noah's flood, leading up before and during Noah's flood. The tidal pumping, water going up and down, makes sideways movement of the water, which carries a lot of sediments. Water moving, once water starts moving, it picks up debris, sand, gravel, clay, etc., and becomes liquid sandpaper and can carve through rapidly. You can cut through steel with high pressure water. So I think that the layers of Grand Canyon formed during Noah's flood with the tidal pumping up and down, because the tide not only going up and down, it's rushing in and out. Now, 50 or 100 years later, the top part of these layers would have been dried out. After Noah's flood, everything had to dry out. I mean, within a few days, it'd be dried out a few feet where you could walk on it. but it would take hundreds of years, maybe even thousands of years to dry out for the whole depth of it. I think if you dig down deep enough, you'll find it's still not dried out in some places. This would all be from Noah's flood. So the crust of the earth would be dry. Noah gets out, everybody runs around, they're all happy, developing populations. 50 or 100 years later, Grand Lake, behind where Grand Canyon is now, got too full from rainfall or water runoff or whatever. Water from Montana and Wyoming drains down into what would be, if you plugged up Grand Canyon, the lake that formed collects water from Montana and Wyoming. Watch my video number 6. Anyway, so you're confusing the forming of the canyon with the forming of the layers, which was probably 50 to 100 years earlier. So what's your question again?
So one, water from Montana and Wyoming would not contain all of these sea animals and sea life that we find fossilized in the Grand Canyon. And
one topic at a time. Don't go on to number 2.
But you addressed the topics.
One at a time, please. Moderator, shut his mic off. Listen. Water from Montana. You don't know that Montana existed before the flood. The whole world was covered with water during the flood. Okay, put my globe here. So what is now Montana might have been the bottom of an ocean before, or might have been the bottom of a sea. The crust of the earth is broken up into plates. Nobody argues about that. And the plates are still shifting and moving around. Some flex up and down. Some go side to side. There's strike faults and slip faults. So you're assuming that the earth we see today is what Noah would have seen when he went on the ark. And there's your false assumption. Montana might have been the bottom of a seabed before the flood. It then raised up a couple thousand feet because of the crust of the earth flexing around. So you're starting with a false assumption and probably going to accuse the Bible of being wrong because of your false assumption. That was one point. What's your second point? And one point only, please. I insist on this.
Okay, my second point was that your explanation cannot explain why we see tracks in the layers that are intermediate. We're not talking about the topmost layers here. We see tracks in the intermediate layers from terrestrial animals.
I agree. Moderator, don't let him talk now, one point at a time.
Right.
The layers that we see in the earth would have formed during this year-long flood. We don't know that the earth was instantly flooded and stayed underwater for a year. What we do know from the Bible is Noah was in the ark for a year. That's the record, a little over a year, 13 months. We do know the Bible says the rain was 40 days, but the water kept coming up for 150 days. Most of the flood water came from inside the earth. The Bible says the fountains of the deep were broken up. What we see today is a very different world than what they had then. Today, the earth is only 3% habitable for mankind. God said in Isaiah, he formed it to be inhabited. So the original creation was mostly habitable. Today, the earth is mostly uninhabitable. 70% of it's underwater. A whole bunch more is under desert or ice caps. 3% of the world is habitable for mankind. We are seeing the wreck of what happened from Noah's flood. So before the flood, things were different. During that flood, the crust is flexing up and down. The water's going back and forth. We have tidal action. We have also crust moving around. There's a lot of factors involved here. So there would be animals running all over trying to survive during the first 6 months of the flood. So they might have been a muddy layer. They go running across because, oh, wow, look, there's high ground. And then 3 weeks later, the ground subsides. And, oh, now it's underwater. And more layers form on top. So again, you're going to assume the Bible is wrong because of your faulty assumption. You don't understand. It's just like 2 Peter said, the scoffers are ignorant of the flood. The flexing of the crust of the earth up and down, back and forth tidal movement would cause some areas to be exposed for maybe for a few weeks. Animals run out there to high ground. Oh, wow, here's a safe place to hide. Later, it might have taken a long time to kill all the people and all the animals during that flood. He was in the ark for a year. The rain was 40 days and 40 nights. So it sounds to me like you're starting with the assumption, wow, Noah gets in, shuts the door, bang, the earth is flooded. How do we get these tracks in between these layers? You don't understand. The layers all form during the flood, and layers can form rapidly. Here, I'll show you. I can flip this thing over and make 20 layers in 5 minutes. Moving water automatically sorts things into different layers. It just does, okay? You can buy these sand art toys all day long, and it proves exactly what happened during Noah's flood. The tide going up and down makes the water going in and out. Hydrologic sorting would happen. Animals would be sorted based upon all kinds of factors: habitat, mobility, body density, intelligence. So the layers all formed, I think, during the flood, and it probably took a year to make them all. So yes, animal tracks could be found between the layers. What can you explain why there are...
And I'm just going to jump in here really quick. So we're going to let Grayson respond. This will be the last of that. Then we're going to head to Raging Atheist and then Rational Empiricist. But Donnie, SFT is here to help keep the flow of the traffic here. I'm sorry, go ahead, Kent.
Would you do one thing? We got to start, Randall, can we just start my program right now? We're late. Can we shut off, call back in, and do this? And this is my favorite thing to do. This is my spiritual birthday. 54 years ago, I gave my heart to the Lord. I love to defend the Bible against skeptics and scoffers and even idiots, okay? So if we can start my program, and then can we do it how do we do it with his on there?
We can just post this one onto our program.
Or post this one onto ours, then we won't be live tonight.
We're already out on the channel.
Okay. Yeah, okay. We'll keep going. We'll post this if that's okay with you. Praise
Absolutely,
I Am. Post this live
absolutely.
on our channel. We have two channels. We have Genesis Baptist Church on YouTube, and we have all of my other stuff going up on Kent Hovind Official on Rumble. And we'll be on many other platforms. And if they shut all of them off, we're going to produce DVDs. And if they shut them off, I'm going to go stand on the street corner and keep preaching. Okay?
Amen. Amen, brother.
Okay.
And let me say that. And let me say this, Praise. I am posting the link to Kent's new channel, Genesis Baptist Church, in the live chat. So please, everybody, click it and go subscribe, because that's where you're going to find Kent on YouTube, but also on Rumble. So anyways, I'm enjoying this praise in Kent. So God bless, brothers.
And please, Donnie, help me out. One topic at a time. I've done the 300 and some of these debates. They make a statement and then go off to something else before you get a chance to answer. Don't do that.
Right. So Grayson and Rational Empiricist and also Raging Atheist, if you can stick to one topic at a time, let Kent respond to your one topic and then go to the next. And that's how we're going to work things here. So please respect the host. I mean, our guest tonight, Kent. None of this, this type of troll nonsense. But so go ahead, Grayson. I'll let you respond to that. Then we'll hand it up to Raging Atheist after that.
Actually, and before you do, let me just say one thing. Sorry, Grayson. And so these are open mics, obviously. So there's going to be limited discussion per person. So if you want to set up a debate with Dr. Dino, where it's just an hour and a half debate, the Evolution Debate Challenge, reach out to me. And what we can do, especially if there's a lot of requests, is we can split up the debates on my channel, Praise's channel. We'll have some fun in 2023. Go ahead.
Right. So this is the first time I've heard Kent or a creationist say that the global flood was not a global flood and that it was really like a yakety-yak game of whack-a-mole with a patch of dry land constantly shifting around and animals running from one corner to the other. And that's what's creating these footprints that we see in the intermediate layers. Is just those are the animals that were lucky enough to survive from safe haven to safe haven running around.
Stop. You are lying, sir. I did not say it was not a global flood. Listen to me. Read my lips. It was a global flood, but it took a year to kill everything. The water was not instantly over the whole globe for a year. Stop being so stupid, okay? I did not say it's not a global flood. It was a global flood. The world was completely covered by the end of this flood, at least 7 or 8 months into it, but there were plenty of time up to that point where the crust was flexing up and down. So yes, don't lie about me. It was a global flood. You said it's the first time I've heard anybody say that. I didn't say it. Don't put words in my mouth. Go ahead. One point at a time.
Well, I thought that Noah was constantly letting birds loose and they were flying around and they could find no dry land. So if there were really these patches of dry land that some animals were running around back and forth to stay safe in, then the birds would have found them and they wouldn't have returned to the ark.
1 point at a time. When did Noah let the birds out of the ark? Have you even read the Bible story? This was near the end of a year.
Times.
Okay. It was nearly a year later. He let the bird out. They came back, couldn't find dry land. Oh, wow. So 11 months into this flood, it was totally covered. But during the first 11 months, it would be a flexing up and down, and there would be patches of dry land coming up and down. See, you're willingly ignorant of the flood, exactly like 2 Peter said. He prophesied you. Write your name next to 2 Peter chapter 3. That's you. Go ahead.
Well, even if they were leaving footprints in these intermediate layers, they would get washed away and they wouldn't have been preserved or solidified. That's not how this works logically.
1 point at a time. You are mistaken. You don't understand how water works. You can leave your footprints in mud Another layer of soft mud comes over the top and preserves the footprint. They do it all the time. It's called casting. They make castings of footprints. You can go make a footprint in the mud and then cover it with another layer and let them all harden and separate, and there's your footprint again. So you start off with a false assumption again and make a claim about that and try to discredit the Bible based on that silly claim. No, footprints can be preserved in soft mud. How soft was the mud? Are there different levels of softness and hardness of mud? Come see our gravel pit. They range all the way from sloppy wet, where it won't leave a footprint, to pretty hard, where you got to push hard to make a footprint. So you have a complete lack of understanding, I guess, of how footprints are made in mud and what different densities and hardnesses of mud. Yes, obviously it happened. Their footprints are there. Footprints are found all over the world, preserved. Fossil footprints of dinosaurs, trackways that go for, I think, 1/4 mile is now the longest. What's that dinosaur running from in the mud? I think the floodwaters rising. So go ahead. Yes, footprints are found and they can be preserved that way. You are mistaken. Try again. Go ahead.
They would not have been preserved that way in the types of rocks that we find in the layers of the Grand Canyon, especially the ones that are intermediate.
You're assuming that the type of rock was always rock. Okay, obviously, limestone, nearly all of Grand Canyon is made of what's called sedimentary rock. Let me explain it to you. I taught earth science. Sediment is things that settle out. Lots of things you can make sedimentary rock. Concrete would be a sedimentary rock that later hardens into concrete. We have all kinds of it around our dinosaur adventureland here. So yes, I think the layers of Grand Canyon are nearly all sedimentary rock, which means they were mud at one time. Try again.
That mud is not equivalent to sedimentary layering. Those are not the same thing. Sand and you might say
Grayson,
sand, but
Grayson, what grade are you in?
I have graduated from college.
Wow. And they taught you this. Okay, go ahead.
Yep. I mean, everything that you said about sedimentary layers is pretty well known. They form from sediments and small bits of silicon, not from mud.
Mud is considered a sedimentary, it can make a layer and can harden into stone.
Yeah, but what kind of rock does mud harden into? Not the kind of rock that we see in the Great Canyon.
It depends what your definition of mud is. Mud can be made up of all kinds of things. When they mix concrete and pour it out, they call it mud. Then you flatten it out and level it out. You can leave footprints in it if you want. Somebody did right here at Dinosaur Adventureland, and it hardened into concrete. Wow. And the footprints are still there.
Yeah, so it seems a little bit like moving the goalposts of the definitions of mud
no,
here.
You're the one moving the goalposts. You're trying to scramble things up where people can't follow the logic here. Noah's flood would have made these layers. Some might have been exposed to the sun enough to dry out a little bit before they're covered by the next layer. Some might have been covered right away. I can make a whole bunch of layers in a hurry with this thing. They never get a chance to dry out. But it'll make layers quickly. Here, look at
so
them.
Then how do you explain again, the original question was, how do you explain the types of fossils that are found within these layers in the Grand Canyon, which I don't think that you've done an adequate job of explaining why we find the fossils that we do find there.
Okay, first, the fact that we find fossils at all is an indication of rapid burial. No animals are fossilizing today, and certainly not in any number that nobody's ever seen it. Okay, millions of animals die every day in the world. None of them fossilize. Yet they find
lots of fossils are forming today.
Say that again.
There are lots of fossils forming today as we speak.
Okay, Grayson, I would like you to prove that statement. I'd like you to show me where fossils are forming.
Yeah, in the ground, all over the earth.
Good. I think we could. Okay, show me a fossil forming today. I'd like to see the evidence of this. Certainly, we probably would agree on at least one thing. Trillions of fossils exist. Especially if you want to count tiny organisms like limestone or some rocks are nothing but fossils. Okay.
I think we're going to finalize this because we're going to hand it off to Raging here in a second. So just maybe a few more minutes because it'll just be all Grayson and Kent. We want to give other people a chance as well. So go ahead and finish this up, Grayson.
And thank you. You see why I insist on one topic at a time. I've been in all these debates. They want to mention 10 things. You only got time to mention one, answer one, and they think, wow, I won on the other 9. Okay. Layers can form quickly. The flood of Noah, I wasn't there. I'll watch the movie when I get to heaven and try to get the message to you, wherever you are at that time. But the flood of Noah, or the crust of the earth is still flexing up and down. Just the tide. Kansas lifts up about 2 inches when it goes under the moon. The whole state of Kansas comes up and down. They don't notice it, but there is still tidal flexing of the crust of the earth today. During Noah's flood, when it was freshly broken up, the cracks would have been more, less locked together. There would have been a lot more flexing of the crust of the earth. And yes, I think some sections would have been, might even dried out for a few days. Noah was in the ark for a year. The flood did not cover the whole world for a year. You're willingly ignorant of the flood. This is a great birthday party for me. Thank you, but I like it. And Rumble's a good program for me. I like to rumble once in a while, and I'm in a mood tonight. Go ahead.
Awesome, Kent. I love it.
Go get him.
So we'll just actually, Grayson, if you want to hang around after Kent and Rational Empiricist, we can strike this conversation a little bit more if Kent is still around, if he wants to stay
Right, because
around,
once we circle back around, we can begin to address some more of those points with Grayson and Kent. And Grayson,
Sure.
Let's set up a round 3. Kent versus Grayson and Mark.
Can I just get a concluding statement real quick? Okay, so I just want to say,
sure.
at one hand, Kent says that the flood formed all the layers at the same time, and then in the other hand, he says that intermediate during while these layers were forming, and the intermediate layers were on the surface enough for terrestrial animals to walk over them. And I don't see how those two ideas can possibly both be true. So I'll just end it there.
I agree. You don't see how it can happen. I agree with that.
So now we'll hand it up to Raging. I know Rage has been waiting there, so go ahead.
What you see here is cross-bedding, basically, and by the angle of the cross-beds, we know this was formed by wind-blown sediments by a desert. And this is, like I said, just one example of these types of deposits. So how do you explain these massive sand deserts, basically, during a worldwide flood?
Well, again, it sounds like you're assuming the world was underwater the whole year. As I said before, the crust of the earth would be flexing up and down.
By water.
I do believe the earth was covered by water at some point, all of it eventually covered by water. Obviously, would you agree that these layers have evidence of some water being involved in depositing some of the layers?
No, they don't have any evidence in these specific layers, no. It's all wind-blown deposits.
Is it called sandstone or just a sand dune?
It's a preserved sand dune that now forms sandstone.
Okay. How does sandstone form?
It can form many different ways. This particular sandstone formed in a sand dune environment.
Does a sand dune harden into stone ever?
Yes, we see that happening today. You can look underneath a sand dune and you can see the layers deposited over time.
Right. But they don't form into stone and harden unless there's water involved. Is that a reasonable statement?
I would not consider that a reasonable statement. No, you just said not all sediments can be need water to be deposited. Correct?
No, I'm asking you, how does a sand dune turn? Can a sand dune turn to stone with no water involved whatsoever? You're saying
yes.
a pile of sand. Okay, we have sand dunes right here on our property. Come see Dinosaur Adventureland. It was a gravel pit. There are giant sand dunes here, and sure enough, the wind blows them around. Makes layers just like this. They will not turn to stone, though. There has to be a chemical reaction, and it involves water. So I think what you're showing is clear evidence of Noah's flood. I've been there to the Navajo sandstone, and it's beautiful. Love it. But I think during the flood of Noah, the tide going up and down and the crust of the earth flexing up and down is certainly capable of creating this. Now, if you believe in evolution, I'll ask you a slightly off-topic question. Do you believe all these sandstone layers fit in a dot smaller than a proton eventually, way back billions?
That's not what we're talking about, Ken, so please stay
Okay, I know. I know you don't want to talk about that, but if you believe in evolution, that is what you believe. All those grains of sand fit in a dot, didn't they?
So Kent,
that's why you don't show the face. I understand. Go ahead.
Ken, are you suggesting that these sand dune deposits basically, because if you look at the reason we know, let me clarify this, the reason we know that they're sand dune deposits is, like I said, because of the angle of these crossbeds, because sand has what's called a maximum angle of repose because of the dune slumping over itself, basically. That's how we know this is a sand dune preserved, basically. And in my view, at least, and in the view of the vast majority of geologists, this is inconsistent with the world being covered by water. it certainly couldn't be a dune migrating and slumping over itself during a worldwide flood.
Well, I think you'd probably have to talk to some of the. There are some creationists who specialize more in these features like this than I do. I'm looking at the much bigger picture of, you believe all these sand dunes of the whole world, all the stars fit in a dot. You want to try to find fault with Noah's flood with something like this and say, because this flood story doesn't answer this question, therefore we're related to mosquitoes and we all came from a dot. That's the logical conclusion you guys come to.
No,
you believe in evolution?
I bring this up because it's fundamentally in conflict with the idea of a worldwide flood.
Well,
And
first, I don't think it's.
you're dodging this is.
Well, let me
evident
address
to
that
me.
real quick. I'm co-host here, but I do want to point out that this question about the sandstone here, the Coconino sandstone, whether it's deposited in a dry desert or during the Genesis flood, you guys in the secular community say that it was a desert, but there have been an entire team of geologists, PhD geologists, in the field who went and looked at these supposed 7 facts that support this desert hypothesis, Andrew, and they actually discovered that they each match the flood interpretation perfectly. So you saying it's
notice
in
how
complete...
I wasn't discussing the Coconino, though.
Yeah.
I was discussing the Navajo and several others.
Oh, that's my point, Donnie. They look at one thing like this that they think creationists can't explain yet, and therefore conclude that they came from a rock, which came from a dot of nothing. Don't you?
I'm sorry, what?